Events in the Middle East, CBN viewers have come to appreciate Chris Mitchell's timely reports from this explosive region of the world. Chris first began reporting on the Middle East in the mid-1990s, and he traveled to a great number of hotspots covering religious and political issues facing Israel and the surrounding Arab states. One of his more significant reports focused on the emigration of persecuted Christians from the Middle East. And he's also covered a great number of issues on the spiritual arena and the religious arena in the United States. In addition to his reports for the 700 Club, Chris is also a regular contributor to Christian World News, a weekly 30-minute newscast that airs in multiple markets nationally. And prior to joining CBN News in 1992, Chris worked for 3 years as a researcher, producer, and reporter for the Features Testimonies Department of the 700 Club. And Chris is a native of the Boston area, where we spent 2 years of my life, and Natasha, and in history, and also at the University of New Hampshire in 1975. And in 1987, he graduated with honors from Regent University, earning a master's in communication. Thank you so much indeed, Chris, for moderating this very important and strategic panel on security and defense.
Scott is going to be speaking in just a few minutes.
Thank you, Joel. First of all, I just wanted to say what a powerful story that is from Pastor Edmonds. And as Ollie North would say at the end of War Stories, that's a war story that deserves to be told. So I hope CBN News can tell that as well in the near future. So it's my privilege to be here at this briefing, this session on defense and security, securing peace through strength. And joining me is the distinguished list of speakers. Christian Winberg from Sweden is a member of the European Freedom and Direct Democracy Party. Christina also serves in the European Parliament. David Weinberg is a lead columnist for the Jerusalem Post and Israel Hayom newspapers. He also serves as the Director of Public Affairs at Bar-Ilan University's Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Centers, and has served as Senior Advisor to Deputy Prime Minister Natan Sharansky. Michael Madorakamian is the President of the People's Party in Belgium, Vice President of the Alliance for Direct Democracy and publisher of Le People. He's also the husband of Yasmin Dinan. And also Scott Taylor is a U.S. Congressman-elect from Virginia's 2nd District, who serves in the town where CBN is headquartered. And if I lived in the 2nd District, I would have voted for Scott. I live in the 3rd District, so I had to miss that opportunity to vote for Scott. Scott's a former Navy SEAL, an Iraqi war veteran, and author of Trust Betrayed, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and the Selling Out of America's National Security. And also, I recommend, if you get on YouTube, watching the documentary on SEAL Team 6. So with that, Scott is going to have a keynote address, but there'll be messages from each of our speakers, and then, because of time, an abbreviated discussion. So, Congressman Scott.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Congressman Bratt, members of Parliament, Becky Dunlap, distinguished guests. Shalom to my Israeli friends, namaskar to my Indian friends, and good afternoon to everyone else, both here and out there. First, I want to thank Joel and Natasha for their heroic efforts to get this thing together. Why don't we give them a round of applause? You guys have done a wonderful job. Putting this excellent summit together. It's great to be back in the Holy Land and the true capital of Israel. In fact, our president-elect believes that the embassy should be moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And I agree with him. Thank you. I agree with him. In fact, I spotted a nice little spot, a couple blocks away from here with the American flag that we can go ahead and make that happen. So let's get on that. Let's get on that. I'm honored to be here amongst distinguished individuals, folks who no doubt are rising stars and established stars on the world stage and in their own countries. Now, the last time and the first time I visited this Holy Land was last year during the holidays. I flew into Amman, Jordan, and traveled to the Syrian border to visit the refugees. I grabbed a Yemeni buddy of mine in Amman, whom I worked with in the Arabian Desert years before, to interpret for me, and I spent years in and out of Yemen, and also time, of course, in the war in Iraq and various other Middle Eastern countries. So it was crazy that I had never stopped in Israel before. But I was worried about going back to Yemen, having come from Israel and being apprehended as a spy or something crazy like that. In fact, my buddy, my Yemeni buddy, really wanted to come to Israel, but he was worried about being killed if he went back home. What a shame that is. But I'll tell you, I'm glad to be back. It's good to be back here with all of you and all of you watching from afar. I'd like today to speak briefly on the Middle East, American foreign policy, and finally, what the future looks like in terms of threats, challenges, and opportunities. Let me first say there's nothing small about the giant challenges that we face here. And I say we because I truly believe that everything that happens here in the Middle East affects most of the world, and we are in this together. Now, please understand today that my comments are from an American perspective. However, I am mindful that the world is a very large place, and there are very many different opinions and interests and deeply held beliefs. But I do believe that understanding culture and the reality on the ground is pertinent for policymakers of all countries, business leaders of all country leaders, thinkers of all countries as well too. It is with context, not just text, that you gain deep understanding. And let me give you a quick example from Yemen, what I'm talking about. So years ago, I served as a security consultant for an American company, and we're in the Arabian Desert, an Al-Qaeda country, and there were these oil facilities. And we were in charge of about 150 Yemeni military folks, and we had about 50 or so Bedouin guards. And one day I get a call. Inside our facilities, there was no weapons allowed, but outside of the facilities, of course, everyone that's over 11 years old has an AK-47, right? So, which is why it's very easy for me to negotiate in Washington. There's not Arabic and AK-47s everywhere, right? It's a little easier. So I get a call, and what was happening was there was a local tribal guy who was stopping the food gate to get into our facilities. Now understand that there's trucks that drops off food, your supplies, for weeks at a time at each gate, and they're on a schedule. So I had to make sure that guy got off the gate. But we didn't have any weapons inside, so we brought in the Yemeni military to get this guy off the gate to allow for the food to come in. So if you're aware of that culture, the army and the local Bedouin tribal guys, they don't get along very well. The army guys go in there to get this guy off the gate. There's 3 of them, they're armed. And within about 2 minutes or so, there was probably 20 or so Bedouins picking up pipes and sticks. And it was escalating very quickly. And if you understand the culture there, you understand that there's no give, that there are actually mechanisms in place to reduce violence, because you can't call 911 in the middle of the desert, right? So now I had to really go down there and confront this situation. And my Arabic is limited. It's not good enough to be able to diffuse a situation like this. And my interpreter was basically worthless because he was scared. And I happened to have a New York Giants hat on. And I remember from studying anthropology in Arabia that if you take off your headdress and you put it on top of the head of the person that you are having a dispute with, it means that you submit to a peaceful resolution. And if that person doesn't respond in kind, then they're shamed amongst the tribe. And as many of you know, shaming is a big deal in this part of the world. So I didn't think it was going to work. But I stepped forward, I took my New York Giants hat off, and I put it on the head of the guy that was stopping the gate, and everything stopped. And they looked at me and they were like, how does this guy know this? How does he know this? It bought me all kinds of street credit or sand credit at the time. But why I tell you this is you have to understand what's going on in the world. And as policy leaders in different countries, if we don't understand the cultures and what's going on in the world, we're going to make bad decisions. So I implore all of us to always reach out and try to figure out what's going on. Now, I want to tell you about 4 major threats to peace, prosperity, and stability here regionally that are affecting things globally. Iran's actions, radical Islam, and failing or failed states, and Syria. Let's talk about Syria really briefly. Horrible human suffering, a disintegrated state, and conflict with many powers primarily involved. And when you consider for a second that America, Russia, Turkey, Iran, and others actually have troops on the ground fighting, there's tremendous potential for a flashpoint in conflict that could cause a greater conflict in the region and go globally. And I think about that very often. The second thing, of course, is the Iranian regime's aggressive foreign policy, their nuclear aspirations, and an institutionalized exportation of revolution. It's wreaking havoc on this region. I want to be clear that the Iranian people, the citizens of that country, they desire to live a good life like most of us. The blame lies on the Iranian leadership. Their funding of Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad of Palestine, and control of the Assad regime threatens Israel on three sides, in Lebanon and Gaza and Syria, and it helps to destabilize the Sinai Peninsula. But via proxies, and sometimes their own troops, they're in Libya, in Yemen, and Iraq. And their pursuit of nuclear weapons and cheating on the very flawed Iranian deal, and their threats of shutting down the Straits of Hormuz further add to the instability. Number three, radical Sunni Islam. It's not a new phenomenon, but it has grown exponentially given the internet, bad governance, and vacuums created by conflict. Number four, failed or failing states. It's a major threat to world peace, prosperity, and stability because they become petri dishes of conflict, extremism, and human suffering. Now, how do we work to reverse, reduce, or eradicate some of these threats? I speak to you today as a man who has been elevated with the honor and the responsibility to represent an American congressional district in Virginia that, as far as I know, has more military and active duty and veterans than any congressional district in the nation. If something happens in the world, my people go forward. And now when we think of foreign policy, and we should think of chess, and we spoke to your ambassador this morning, Ambassador Isharaf, hopefully I pronounced his name right. This morning he mentioned chess moves and how the scenery changes very quickly. Think about this for a second, because I believe foreign policy is much like chess. After a move from each side in a game of chess, there are 400 potential positions. By the third move from each side, there are over 9 million potential positions. By the fourth, over 288 billion, with a B, different positions. In foreign policy, when states make moves, and certainly when America makes a move, the whole game changes. And perhaps in a year, things are much different than they are today. That being said, we've got to have flexibility to be able to move within those parameters, but we must be tied to our core principles. In Europe and India and Israel, etc., all of us have shared interest in promoting global stability, security. Collaborating by bilateral and multilateral defense and counterterrorism cooperation is essential for us. All of us should have be robust economically back home and ensure that we maintain our military advantage and that same advantage that we must maintain and help Israel have that advantage in this region. We should not be ashamed about championing democratic values, but also not force the exportation of democracy. We must counter an ideology of radical Islam, not simply with military, but with soft power as well, even with our Muslim partners, and we must reform, I believe, how we give foreign aid, adding a component of one of America's most talented industries, marketing. With American marketing, people dance hip-hop in Haiti, they drink Pepsi in Paraguay, and they wear baseball t-shirts in Bangladesh. The world can and must counter the narrative of radical Islam. Further, we must not let weakness embolden a resurgent Russia. The last thing the world needs is a conflict between two superpowers, but we shouldn't allow Russia to be a bad actor on the world stage. Sure, we can sanction, but if we simply start exporting gas to our European friends, that's another tool in our pockets that we could really influence the Russians. The same with Iran. Many of you know in this region of the world, people respect or they fear strength. They shall be prevented from getting a nuclear weapon, and their threat of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz is a bluff. They don't want the backlash of a coalition that would come against them if they did that. In this new administration, I believe that we will respond forcefully should they attempt to provoke our military once again. China. I think you're seeing a theme in most of my stuff here, a little bit of peace through strength. As you guys just read in the paper, China just seized a drone from a U.S. naval ship in international waters. It's with my hope of this new administration that a future response to this type of thing will not be a muted one. Now, we've got to be willing to have practical coalitions to maintain peace and stability and prosperity. And this may include a Russia or China or Iran in some way. Democratic nations such as a rising India, our Indian friends here, have a big part to play and a rising part to play in world stability. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a soldier. I've buried and listened to Amazing Grace many, many times, more than anybody that I would wish upon anyone. But we must always prepare for war, not for war itself, but to maintain peace. Our preparation for conflict or war is no doubt the most enduring keeper of peace. To turn a blind, hopeful eye is to be naive. There have been over 30 conflicts and wars since 1960. Now, I want to end with a few thought-provoking ideas and questions that are left unanswered because I know this is a leadership summit and you will make these leadership decisions moving forward. I want you to consider the way the world looks today. Here's an example. In 1995, Mike Fisher from my small hometown of Hebron, Maryland, not Hebron, Israel, had the first car phone. And if you guys remember, those car phones were about this big, their service sucked, they weren't really good at all, right? Fast forward 5 years. In 2000, I was with a platoon full of Navy SEALs, and all of us bought cell phones, Sprint cell phones, little flip phones, at one time. The service still sucks. We had to climb a tower to get any kind of service at all. Fast forward 5 years, 2005. I'm in the middle of the desert of Ramadi, Iraq, with a little Nokia phone that had clearer service than a sat phone. Fast forward 5 more years, and I have a smartphone that has almost all the world's knowledge at my fingertips. The world's changing very quickly. 3D printing, driverless cars, drones, the cloud. Consider this. In 1997, 20 years ago, the world's most powerful supercomputer was almost the size of a tennis court. The electricity that it took to power this supercomputer, the strongest one in the world, could power 800 homes. By 2005, do you know what the equivalent of that supercomputer was? A Sony PlayStation. A Sony PlayStation. So why I say that to you is, think about that for 1 second. An individual playing on a Sony PlayStation has the amount of computer power that the most powerful nation state's supercomputer was just 20 years earlier. Or just 20 years earlier from now, because it's much more now. And why I also say that is, that means that anywhere, anyone, anywhere in the world can be potentially vulnerable by anyone, anywhere in the world. And that's scary. It presents enormous challenges, but also opportunities. But listen, I look forward to a future to navigating these challenges, these opportunities with folks like you. So I want to say Toda to my Israeli friends, Shukriya to my Indian friends, and thank you very much.